Welcome, dear viewers. For more exclusive stories, join our membership, starting at just 69 cents per month. Enjoy. The quarterly sales meeting in Burlington wasn't something I was looking forward to. As Northeast Regional Manager for Pinnacle Software Solutions, I'd be spending 3 days in conference rooms, pretending to care about Q2 projections, while secretly checking my fantasy football lineup under the table. But after the disaster with the Boston office's numbers last quarter, I needed to show my face and take my lumps. I'd planned to book a room at the Hilton downtown where the conference was being held, but by the time I got approval for the trip, they were fully booked with some craft beer festival happening the same weekend. The closest hotel with availability was 45 minutes away in Montpelier, and I wasn't about to commute that far each day. That's when Sheila from HR suggested I try Airbnb. It's what all the younger guys are doing now, Mark. You might even find something with character. Character wasn't what I was after, but proximity was. A quick search on the app revealed slim pickings near downtown Burlington, but one listing caught my eye. A renovated farmhouse just outside of Northfield, Vermont. 25 minutes to Burlington on Route 89, private entrance, full kitchen, reasonable price. The photos showed an old white farmhouse with black shutters, surrounded by rolling fields that had started to turn golden in the late summer sun. The reviews praised the peace and quiet. It seemed perfect. The host, Eleanor, had responded quickly to my booking request. Looking forward to having you, Mark. I'll leave the key under the blue flower pot on the porch. There's a welcome packet on the kitchen counter with some important information about the property. Make sure to read it thoroughly upon arrival. I'd arrived in Vermont on a Sunday afternoon, the day before the meeting. The drive from Boston had been pleasant enough, the Mass Pike giving way to the verdant hills of Vermont, where the trees were just starting to hint at their eventual autumn blaze. I stopped in Montpelier for a late lunch at a place called the Skinny Pancake, where I demolished a crepe stuffed with local ham and cheese before continuing on to Northfield. The GPS directed me off the main road onto increasingly narrow country lanes. Cell service became spotty as I wound through hills dotted with small farms and old houses. Just when I began to wonder if I'd missed a turn, I spotted the white farmhouse matching the photos, set back from the road at the end of a gravel driveway. The house itself was larger than it appeared in the photos. 2 stories of weathered white clapboard with black shutters, a wide front porch with rocking chairs, and a red barn visible behind it. No cars were parked in the drive, and no one came out to greet me as I pulled up. True to her word, Eleanor had left the key under a blue ceramic flower pot filled with dying petunias. I let myself in through the front door, which opened directly into a living room with wide plank wooden floors and a stone fireplace. The place smelled of pine cleaner and something else, something earthy and organic that I couldn't quite place. The welcome packet sat on the kitchen counter as promised, a manila folder with guest information written on it in neat handwriting. Inside was a typed sheet with Wi-Fi information, instructions for the old gas stove, and recycling guidelines. But what caught my attention was a handwritten notepaper clipped to the back. Important. Rules for staying at Northfield Farm. I almost didn't read it. After a 4-hour drive, all I wanted was to unpack, maybe grab a beer from the 6-pack I'd brought along, and relax. But something about the urgent handwriting, the way the pen had pressed deeply into the paper, made me pause. 7 rules were listed. At first glance, they seemed like the typical eccentric requests you might expect from someone renting out part of their property. But as I read further, a cold weight settled in my stomach. I checked my phone to call Eleanor and ask about this strange list, but the signal had disappeared completely. The Wi-Fi password didn't work either. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the fields surrounding the house. In the distance, where the mown grass gave way to taller weeds and eventually forest, something dark moved along the tree line. I looked down at the rules again, particularly number 3. Do not look out any window after sunset. Suddenly, the 3-day sales meeting didn't seem so bad after all. I took another look at the list, now giving it my full attention. The rules were written in blue ink, the handwriting neat, but pressed deep into the paper as if the writer had been gripping the pen too tightly. Rules for staying at Northfield Farm 1. Be inside the house by sunset. Lock all doors and windows. 2. Do not leave the house between sunset and sunrise for any reason. 3. Do not look out any window after sunset. 4. If you hear knocking at any door or window, ignore it completely. Do not respond, no matter who or what you think it is. 5. Keep one light on in any room you occupy, but never more than one. 6. If the lights flicker, go immediately to the basement and remain there until they stabilize. 7. If you find dirt on the floor that wasn't there before, sweep it up immediately and flush it down the toilet. Do not use the trash can or sink. The paper trembled slightly in my hand. I wasn't normally the type to spook easily. I'd been through 2 divorces and a company downsizing after all. But something about the specificity of these instructions sent a chill through me. I folded the note and tucked it into my pocket, then busied myself with bringing in my luggage, a carry-on suitcase and laptop bag. The house was well maintained but clearly old, with that particular creakiness that comes with century-old timber. The rental portion consisted of the entire ground floor, a living room, kitchen, bathroom, and bedroom. The upper floor, according to the listing, was Eleanor's private residence, though there was no sign of her or anyone else. After unpacking, I checked my watch. 6:17 p.m. According to the weather app I'd checked earlier, sunset would be around 7:30. Plenty of time to explore the grounds a bit and maybe find a spot with cell service. The property was more extensive than I'd realized. Behind the barn was a large vegetable garden, now mostly harvested, except for some late-season squash and root vegetables. Beyond that, the mown lawn extended about 50 yards before giving way to waist-high grass, which in turn ended at the edge of a dense forest that seemed to stretch up the hillside and over the ridge. Walking the perimeter of the cleared area, I finally found a single bar of cell service near an old maple tree. I quickly dialed Eleanor's contact number from the Airbnb app. After 4 rings, she answered. "Mark? Is everything all right?" Her voice was clear but cautious. "Yes, I'm settled in, but I wanted to ask about the, rules you left." A pause. "So you found them? Good. Are they serious? Because they seem a little..." I trailed off, not wanting to offend. "They're completely serious." Her tone was flat, matter of fact. "This property has certain peculiarities. The rules are for your safety." "What exactly am I being kept safe from?" I asked, watching as the shadow of the house stretched longer across the lawn. Another pause, longer this time. "It's complicated. Let's just say that Northfield has a history, and some parts of that history don't stay in the past where they belong. Especially on this property." "Is this some kind of local ghost story? Because I don't..." "It's not a ghost story," she cut me off. "Ghosts wouldn't necessitate Rule 7. I was about to ask what she meant when my phone beeped and the call dropped. No service again. Looking back toward the house, I noticed how quickly the shadows were lengthening. The sun was low now, painting the white clapboard a warm orange. Rule 1 echoed in my mind. Be inside by sunset. I hurried back, suddenly aware of how quiet it was. No birds, no distant traffic, not even the sound of insects. Just the whisper of a light breeze through the grass and my own footfalls on the packed earth. Inside, I locked the door behind me and drew the curtains closed without looking out, getting a head start on Rule 3. I wasn't taking any chances, regardless of whether this was an elaborate prank, local superstition, or something else entirely. I decided to make dinner to distract myself. The kitchen was well stocked with pans and utensils, and I'd picked up some groceries in Montpellier. As I chopped vegetables for a stir-fry, I tried to rationalize the situation. Probably just an eccentric owner playing into some local legend to make her Airbnb more interesting. Vermont was full of that kind of stuff. Covered bridges with ghost stories, farms with alien abduction tales. It was probably good for business. While the rice cooker ran, I checked all the doors and windows to make sure they were locked. The house had 3 exterior doors, front, back, and one leading from the mudroom to the side yard. All had deadbolts as well as regular locks, which seemed excessive but reassuring under the circumstances. By the time I sat down to eat, the sun had set completely. The darkness outside the curtained windows was absolute. No street lights, no neighboring houses, nothing but country darkness. I finished my meal and was washing up when I first heard it. A soft, deliberate knock at the back door. Tap, tap, tap. I froze, soapy plate in hand, my entire body suddenly alert. It came again, slightly louder. Tap, tap, tap. Rule 4 flashed in my mind. If you hear knocking at any door or window, ignore it completely. I continued washing the plate, forcing myself to breathe normally, despite my pounding heart. Whatever prank or test this was, I wasn't going to fail it on the first night. Then a voice called out. A woman's voice, soft and uncertain. Hello? Is anyone home? I'm sorry to bother you, but my car broke down up the road. Could I use your phone? It sounded so ordinary, so genuine, that I almost went to answer before catching myself. No matter who or what you think it is, the rule had specified. I dried my hands and walked from the kitchen to the living room, putting distance between myself and the voice. I turned on the TV, keeping the volume low but loud enough to cover any more knocking or calls. As I settled onto the couch, my phone lit up with a text message. 1 bar of service. Just enough. It was from Eleanor. Are you following the rules? I texted back, yes. Someone's knocking. Ignoring it. 3 dots appeared, then. Good. Don't respond no matter what. I'll check on you tomorrow. The knocking came again, this time from the front door, louder and more insistent. Then from a window in the bedroom. Then back to the kitchen door. Whatever was out there was moving around the house, testing each entrance. I stayed on the couch, staring at the TV without registering what was playing, one light on as specified by Rule 5. The knocking continued for what felt like hours, sometimes stopping for 10 or 15 minutes before starting again from a different location. Around midnight, it finally stopped completely. The silence that followed was almost worse than the knocking. I strained my ears, but heard nothing. No footsteps retreating, no car starting, nothing to indicate that whoever or whatever had been trying to get in had left. I checked all the locks again before finally heading to bed, leaving the bedside lamp on and the bedroom door closed. As I lay there, I tried to convince myself that it had been kids playing a prank, or maybe even Eleanor testing to see if I would follow the rules. But deep down, I knew this was something else entirely. Something connected to the peculiar history she had mentioned. And I still had 2 more nights to get through. I woke with a start at 6:34 a.m., my alarm blaring from the bedside table. For a moment, I didn't remember where I was. The unfamiliar ceiling, the too soft mattress, the strange smell of old wood, and something else I couldn't place. Then it came flooding back. Vermont, the Airbnb, the rules, the knocking. Sunlight filtered through the edges of the curtains, which I'd kept tightly closed all night. According to Rule 3, I could look out windows during daylight, but I found myself hesitating anyway. Ridiculous, I told myself. Whatever game was being played here, it obviously operated on a day-night schedule. I pulled back the curtain. The view was perfectly normal. Rolling fields bathed in golden morning light. The forest, a deep green boundary in the distance. A thin mist hovered over the grass, but it was already burning away as the sun climbed higher. No sign of anything or anyone who might have been knocking on doors and windows last night. My meeting in Burlington started at 9 a.m., which meant I needed to be on the road by 8:15 at the latest. I showered quickly, dressed in my standard business attire, navy suit, light blue shirt, striped tie, and headed to the kitchen to make coffee. That's when I noticed it. A trail of dirt on the kitchen floor, leading from the back door to the center of the room. Rule 7 immediately came to mind. If you find dirt on the floor that wasn't there before, sweep it up immediately and flush it down the toilet. The trail wasn't large, just a light scattering of what looked like soil, as if someone with muddy boots had taken a few steps inside. But I knew I hadn't tracked it in myself. I'd been careful about removing my shoes at the door, and besides, this dirt was fresh on top of the clean floor I'd seen last night. I found a broom and dustpan in a closet near the back door and swept up the dirt, careful not to miss any. Following the rule exactly, I took the dustpan to the bathroom and dumped the contents into the toilet, then flushed, watching as the dark soil swirled away. As I returned the broom to the closet, I noticed something odd about the back door. A smudge on the white paint at about chest height. I leaned closer. It wasn't a smudge, but a handprint. A very small handprint, like that of a child, made in the same dark soil that had been on the floor. I stared at it, a cold feeling spreading through my chest. Had someone tried to get in last night? A child? But the door had been locked, all the locks still engaged this morning. I wiped the handprint away with a paper towel, which I also flushed down the toilet. No sense taking chances with Rule 7. By 8:10, I was in my car heading toward Burlington, following the GPS along winding country roads until I reached Route 89. The drive gave me time to think. Last night's knocking and this morning's dirt. They had to be connected. Either someone was playing an elaborate prank, or something very strange was happening at that farmhouse. The logical part of my brain insisted it was just Eleanor or locals having fun with the city guy. The rules, the knocking, the dirt, all designed to create an authentic Vermont ghost story experience. Maybe they even did it for all the guests, part of the farmhouse's appeal for tourists seeking something more interesting than a standard hotel stay. But another part of me, a more primitive part that operated on instinct rather than logic, wasn't so sure. I pushed these thoughts aside as I pulled into the parking garage across from the Hilton. Time to focus on work. The quarterly meeting was being held in the hotel's conference center, a bland space with beige walls and too bright fluorescent lighting. As I walked in, I spotted my team already seated near the front. Mike from the Portland office, Tricia from Hartford, and Ryan from Providence. I joined them, grateful for the normalcy of their shop talk and complaints about the weak coffee. "Mark, you made it," Mike said, sliding over to make room. "How's the Airbnb?" "Better than this corporate monument to mediocrity?" He gestured around at the hotel. "It's interesting," I replied, not wanting to get into the details. "Old farmhouse outside of Northfield." "Northfield?" Ryan perked up. "My cousin went to Norwich University there. Said the town's got some weird history." "What kind of weird history?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Ryan shrugged. "Don't remember exactly. Something about the original settlers and a harsh winter. People disappearing. typical New England small-town stuff. Before I could ask more, the meeting was called to order. Our CEO, Richard Dawson, took the podium and launched into his standard pep talk about market positioning and synergy. I tried to focus, taking notes and nodding at appropriate intervals, but my mind kept drifting back to the farmhouse, to the dirt on the floor, to the small handprint. During the lunch break, I found a quiet corner and tried to research Northfield's history on my phone. There wasn't much. Founded in 1781, home to Norwich University, a military college, since 1866. A devastating flood in 1927. Nothing about disappearances or any particular supernatural legends. I did find one interesting forum thread on a Vermont history site discussing unusual town names. Someone had mentioned that Northfield was originally going to be called Crossfield, but the name was changed just before official incorporation. No explanation was given for the change. My research was interrupted by Sheila from HR, who plopped down in the chair next to me with her salad. "So how's the Airbnb working out?" "Better than fighting with the beer tourists for elevators, I bet." "It's fine," I said noncommittally. Then on impulse, "Do you know anything about Northfield's history?" My host left some notes about local legends, but they were pretty vague. Sheila's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Northfield? That's where you're staying?" She set her fork down slowly. "My grandmother was from there originally. Wouldn't talk about it much, but she had some stories." "What kind of stories?" Sheila glanced around, as if making sure no one was listening. She called them the Hollow Ones. Said they lived in the forests around Northfield, especially north of town where the old farms were. Said they'd come to the houses at night, knocking on doors and windows, trying to get people to let them in. What happened if people let them in? Those people would disappear, and later, something that looked like them but wasn't quite right would come back. She shrugged, picking up her fork again. Just old folk tales to keep kids from wandering in the woods, I'm sure. Vermont's full of that stuff. The afternoon sessions dragged on interminably. I found it impossible to concentrate on sales projections and market analyses. Every time someone mentioned deadlines or cutoffs, my mind substituted sunset. When the overhead lights flickered briefly during one presentation, I nearly jumped out of my seat, Rule 6 flashing in my mind. If the lights flicker, go immediately to the basement. By the time the day's meetings concluded at 5:30 p.m., I was exhausted from the constant tension. Several colleagues invited me to join them for dinner and drinks at a brewery on Church Street, but I declined. According to my weather app, sunset would be at 7:21 p.m. I needed to get back to the farmhouse before then. Traffic was heavier than expected leaving Burlington, and I found myself constantly checking the time as I inched along Route 89. The sun was already low in the sky, casting long shadows across the highway. I made it to the Northfield exit by 6:45, but still had to navigate the rural roads to reach the farmhouse. As I turned onto the gravel driveway, the sun was a blazing orange disk just touching the western ridge. I parked haphazardly and rushed inside, locking the door behind me just as the last sliver of sun disappeared. I had made it, but only barely, and that's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. All the curtains in the house were open, exposing the black glass of the windows to the rapidly darkening night. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen in the entryway. I knew I had closed all the curtains before leaving this morning. I distinctly remembered checking each room, making sure no glimpse of the mysterious outdoors would be visible to me after dark. Rule 3 was very clear. Do not look out any window after sunset. Yet here I was, surrounded by exposed windows, the darkness outside rapidly deepening from navy to black. I had to act quickly. I lunged for the nearest window in the living room, keeping my eyes fixed on the floor as I reached for the curtains. As I fumbled with the fabric, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. Something pale, just beyond the glass. I jerked my head away, heart hammering, and yanked the curtains closed. Moving swiftly from room to room, I closed each set of curtains in turn, being careful to keep my gaze averted from the outside. In the kitchen, the back door had a small window set into its upper half. As I reached to cover it with a dish towel, my eyes betrayed me, flicking up for just an instant. Someone was standing on the back porch. I caught only a glimpse, a figure, human-shaped but somehow wrong, like a child's drawing where the proportions are slightly off. It was facing away from me, looking out toward the field, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. I couldn't see its face, and for that I was immensely grateful. I slapped the dish towel over the window and secured it with tape from a drawer, my hands shaking so badly I could barely manage the task. Rule 3 now felt less like an eccentric request and more like a vital lifeline. With all windows covered, I sank onto the couch, trying to steady my breathing. Maybe I hadn't really seen anything. Maybe it was just a trick of the fading light, a shadow cast by the porch railing or a tree branch. But I knew better. Something was out there, circling the house just as it had last night. I checked my phone, hoping to contact Eleanor again, but there was still no service inside the house. I briefly considered making a run for my car. I could drive back to Burlington, book a hotel room regardless of the cost. But Rule 2 echoed in my mind. Do not leave the house between sunset and sunrise for any reason. My stomach growled, reminding me I'd been too nervous to eat much at lunch. I went to the kitchen, determinedly ignoring the dish towel-covered window, and searched through the refrigerator. I had enough groceries to cobble together a sandwich, which I ate standing up, listening intently for any sounds from outside. At first, there was nothing but the usual creaks and sighs of an old house. Then came the knocking, just as it had last night. 3 soft taps on what sounded like the side of the house, not a door or window this time. Then silence. I turned on the TV for background noise, remembering to keep only one light on in the living room, as Rule 5 specified. My nerves were frayed, every unexpected sound from the TV making me jump. I tried to distract myself by checking my work email on my laptop, but I couldn't focus. The words blurred together as my attention kept drifting to the covered windows, imagining what might be just on the other side of the glass. Around 9:30 p.m., the knocking pattern changed. Instead of the sporadic tapping from last night, it became rhythmic, consistent. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. It moved around the house, methodical, as if checking each potential entry point in sequence. Then a voice called out. Not the woman from last night, but a child. Mister, can you help me find my mom? I'm lost. The voice was high and clear, wavering slightly as if on the verge of tears. It sounded so genuine, so vulnerable, that I found myself standing up before I remembered Rule 4. Do not respond, no matter who or what you think it is. I sat back down, hands gripping the couch cushions, as the child's voice called again. Please? I can see your light. I know you're in there. I'm really scared. The pleading continued, interspersed with soft sobbing that twisted my gut. Every instinct told me to help this lost child, but the rules and the memory of that wrongly proportioned figure on the porch kept me rooted in place. After what seemed like an eternity, the child's voice faded. The knocking stopped too, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt like a physical presence. I must have dozed off on the couch because I woke with a start to the sound of the refrigerator motor cycling on. The TV was still on, showing an infomercial for some kitchen gadget, the volume low. I checked my watch, 3:17 a.m. As I stood up, stretching my stiff back, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then steadied. Rule 6 flashed urgently in my mind. If the lights flicker, go immediately to the basement and remain there until they stabilize. I hadn't even explored the basement yet, having had no reason to go down there. I found the door off the kitchen, a heavy wooden thing with an old-fashioned latch. It opened to reveal a set of steep wooden stairs descending into darkness. I fumbled along the wall and found a light switch, which illuminated a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling below. The basement was unfinished, with a dirt floor and stone foundation walls. Various storage boxes and old furniture were pushed against the walls. A rusty furnace occupied one corner, while an ancient washing machine sat in another. The air was damp and cool, with that distinctive underground smell of earth and mildew. I made my way carefully down the stairs, closing the door behind me as another flicker rippled through the light bulb. At the bottom, I found an old wooden chair and sat down, resigning myself to waiting out whatever electrical issue was causing the fluctuation. That's when I noticed the markings on the floor. At first, I thought they were just random patterns in the dirt, but as my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I realized they were deliberate. Symbols had been etched into the packed earth floor, circles containing strange angular shapes, lines radiating outward like a compass, and what looked like words in some language I didn't recognize. Most disturbing of all, the symbols formed a perfect ring around the perimeter of the basement, with only a small break near the stairs. I was sitting in the center of what was unmistakably a protective circle. The lights flickered more intensely now, the bulb dimming almost to darkness before brightening again. In the brief moments of deeper shadow, I could have sworn the symbols seemed to emit a faint phosphorescence of their own. A low rumble began somewhere beneath the house, less a sound than a vibration I could feel through the chair. The dirt floor seemed to shift slightly, as if something was moving under it. A thin line of soil rose up in the center of the basement, forming a small ridge that began to extend slowly in my direction. I stood up, backing away, but careful not to step on any of the symbols. The ridge continued to grow, reaching about a foot in length before stopping. Then the dirt began to bulge upward. The lights flashed rapidly, then went out completely. In the sudden darkness, I heard a sound like dry earth crumbling. When the bulb came back on, steady and bright, the ridge was gone. The floor was smooth again, as if nothing had happened. But there, in the center of the basement, lay a small object that hadn't been there before. I approached cautiously and bent down to look. It was a button, old-fashioned, made of bone or ivory, yellowed with age. Next to it was a tiny scrap of fabric, the kind that might have come from a child's dress from a century ago. The lights remained stable now, but I wasn't taking any chances. I hurried back up the stairs, shutting the basement door firmly behind me and sliding a kitchen chair under the handle for good measure. In the kitchen, I found more dirt on the floor, a fresh trail leading from the basement door to the back door. Following Rule 7, I swept it up immediately and flushed it down the toilet, trying not to think about what might have made the trail while I was in the basement. I spent the rest of the night on the couch, too wired to sleep despite my exhaustion. Every creak of the house settling made me flinch. Twice I thought I heard scratching sounds from the basement, but they didn't repeat. Dawn came like a salvation, pale light edging around the curtains. I checked each window before looking out, half expecting to see figures standing in the yard, but there was nothing unusual. Just the farmland, misty in the early morning light, and the distant forest line. As I prepared for another day of meetings, I debated what to do. The rational choice would be to pack my things and find a hotel in Burlington. Rules and non-refundable booking be damned. But something held me back. A combination of stubborn pride, skepticism about the supernatural, and, if I'm being honest, morbid curiosity. Plus, there was the matter of Eleanor's text asking if I was following the rules. She knew something about what was happening here, and I needed answers. I decided to stop at the local historical society before heading to my meeting. If anyone could shed light on Northfield's strange peculiarities, it would be there. I jotted down the address from a brochure in the welcome packet. Before leaving, I did one more sweep of the house, checking for any additional dirt or disturbances. Everything seemed normal in the morning light, but as I was about to walk out the door, I spotted something I'd missed. A small, perfect handprint on the inside of the front door, about the height a child might reach, made in dark soil that crumbled at my touch. Whatever had been knocking last night had somehow gotten inside. I swept up the dirt with shaking hands, flushed it as directed, and practically ran to my car. As I backed down the driveway, I glanced up at the second story of the farmhouse, Eleanor's private residence. For just an instant, I thought I saw a face watching me from an upstairs window. Not Eleanor's face, but something else entirely. Something with two large eyes in a too small face. Then it was gone, and I was left wondering if the stress and lack of sleep were finally getting to me. The Northfield Historical Society occupied a small white colonial building on Main Street, directly across from the town common. I had about an hour before I needed to be in Burlington, so I parked and hurried inside, the small bell above the door announcing my entrance. The interior was exactly what you'd expect from a small-town historical society: glass display cases filled with old farming implements, faded photographs in ornate frames, and informational placards yellowing with age. The musty smell of old books and wood polish permeated the air. A woman in her 70s looked up from behind a reception desk, cluttered with papers and coffee mugs. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore a cardigan despite the summer warmth. "Good morning," she said, peering at me over half-moon reading glasses. "Can I help you find something specific?" "I hope so," I replied, approaching the desk. "I'm staying at a farmhouse just outside of town, and I'm interested in learning more about the area's history." "Oh? Which property?" Her tone was conversational, but I noticed how her fingers tightened slightly around her pen. "It's on Hill Road," I said. "An old white farmhouse with a red barn owned by Eleanor Prescott." The woman's expression changed suddenly. A slight narrowing of the eyes, a tightening around the mouth. "The Prescott farm. I see. Do you know it?" I prodded. "Everyone in Northfield knows the Prescott property." She set down her pen and stood. "My name is Margaret Whitcomb. I've been the Society's director for 22 years now." "Mark Sanders." I offered my hand, which she shook briefly. "I'm just curious about some of the local legends. The owner left some interesting house rules." Margaret's face closed off completely. "I'm not sure what you're looking for, Mr. Sanders. We keep historical records here, census data, property deeds, town meeting minutes, not ghost stories." "I understand, but..." "If you're interested in the documented history," she interrupted, "I'd be happy to show you what we have on the Prescott farm." Without waiting for my response, she turned and walked toward a door marked Archives. I followed her into a room lined with metal shelving units filled with acid-free boxes and mother-bound volumes. A research table stood in the center, its wooden surface scratched and worn from decades of use. Margaret went directly to a section labeled 1850 to 1900 and pulled out a large book. "This is the town record from 1878 to 1882, she explained, setting it on the table. She flipped through the pages with practiced efficiency until she found what she was looking for. "Here," she said, pointing to an entry dated November 16th, 1879. This is the first mention of the incident. I leaned closer to read the faded handwriting. Township meeting, called to order to address the disappearance of the Cromwell family, Thomas, Sarah, and children, Mary, John, and infant Rebecca, from their farm north of town. No signs of struggle found in the home. Livestock abandoned. A search party to be organized at first light. Margaret turned to the next page, where an entry dated November 24th, 1879, continued the story. Search for the Cromwell family concluded without result. Property to be held for 1 year and 1 day before being declared abandoned. Strange reports from search party numbers regarding noises at night and unusual tracks in the forest dismissed as superstition. The Cromwell farm, Margaret said quietly, is what's now known as the Prescott property. What happened to them? I asked. Officially, they abandoned their farm and moved west, like many Vermonters did during that period. Unofficially. She trailed off, then pulled another box from a lower shelf. These are newspaper accounts from the Northfield News during that same period. She extracted a folder containing fragile, yellowed newspaper clippings protected in plastic sleeves. One headline caught my eye. Strange occurrences continue at Cromwell property. The article, dated January 1880, described neighbors reporting lights and voices at the abandoned farmhouse. A subsequent investigation found nothing but considerable soil and mud tracked throughout the dwelling. The newspaper speculated about squatters. There were 3 more families who lived on that property between 1880 and 1920, Margaret said, her voice measured. None stayed longer than 2 years. All left abruptly, some in the middle of the night, leaving possessions behind. And the Prescotts? I asked. Eleanor's grandfather purchased the property in 1947 after it had stood vacant for nearly a decade. The Prescotts are the only family who've managed to stay. She gave me a long, evaluating look. They have an understanding with the property. What kind of understanding? Margaret closed the folder carefully. Mr. Sanders, how long are you planning to stay at the farmhouse? Just 2 more nights, I said. I'm here for business in Burlington. She nodded, seemingly relieved. Then my recommendation is that you follow whatever rules Ms. Prescott has provided. Finish your business and leave. Some places have histories best left unexplored by visitors. But what exactly are we talking about here? I pressed. The rules mention not looking out windows after dark, ignoring knocking. I really can't help you beyond the documented history. She cut me off, returning the materials to their shelves. But I will say this. Vermont has deep roots, Mr. Sanders. Long before European settlers arrived, the Abenaki people knew there were certain places in these hills where the boundary between worlds was thin. The Prescott farm sits on one such place. Boundary between worlds? I echoed. Margaret glanced at the antique clock on the wall. Don't you have a meeting to get to in Burlington? She was right. I needed to leave if I was going to make it on time. As she walked me to the door, I tried one more question. The name change from Crossfield to Northfield. Does that have anything to do with this? Margaret's hand paused on the doorknob. The original settlers called it Crossfield because it was where 2 old paths crossed, one running north-south, the other east-west. But they discovered that the crossing wasn't just of physical roads. She opened the door. Good day, Mr. Sanders. Remember what I said about following the rules. The bell jangled as the door closed behind me, leaving me standing on the sidewalk with more questions than answers. The drive to Burlington passed in a blur of speculation. What had Margaret meant about boundaries between worlds? What was the true nature of the knocking, the dirt, the strange figure I'd glimpsed. I arrived at the Hilton with barely 5 minutes to spare, sliding into my seat just as Richard was calling the meeting to order. Today's agenda focused on regional marketing strategies, but I found it nearly impossible to concentrate. I nodded at appropriate intervals and jotted down notes that I knew would make no sense later, all while my mind kept circling back to the farmhouse and what awaited me there after sunset. During the lunch break, I cornered Sheila again. "You mentioned your grandmother was from Northfield," I said without preamble. "Did she ever talk about a farm north of town? The Prescott place, previously the Cromwell farm?" Sheila's expression clouded. "Grandma wouldn't talk about that place specifically. But..." She glanced around, then lowered her voice. "The few times it came up, she'd make the sign of the cross and say, 'That's where the thin people come through.'" The thin people? That's what she called them. Said they were thin, not just in body, but in substance. Like they weren't fully in our world. Sheila shrugged apologetically. "That's all I know. Why are you so interested in this?" I forced a laugh. "Just curious about local folklore. The owner left some creepy house rules as a joke, and I'm trying to figure out what they're based on." She didn't look convinced, but let it drop as our colleagues joined us at the table. The afternoon dragged on with presentations about supply chain optimization and customer acquisition costs. By the time we broke for the day at 4:30, my nerves were frayed. I had a little over 2 hours until sunset, but I wasn't sure I wanted to go back to the farmhouse at all. As I was gathering my things, Ryan approached me. "Hey, I called my cousin about Northfield," he said. "Asked him about those old stories I mentioned. And..." I tried not to sound too eager. "He said there's an old rhyme local kids used to recite. Some kind of warning." Ryan pulled out his phone and read from his notes. "When darkness falls on crossfield ground, close your eyes and don't make a sound. They knock to test, they scratch to try. But let them in and you will die." A chill ran down my spine. "Kids' stuff," I said weakly. Ryan nodded. "Yeah, probably. But my cousin also mentioned something weird. Said his college roommate grew up near an old farm north of town. The guy was totally normal except for one thing. He would never, ever look out windows after dark. Had some kind of panic attack if anyone tried to make him." I thanked Ryan for the information and headed to my car, my decision made. I would go back to the farmhouse one last time to collect my belongings, then find a hotel in Burlington, regardless of the cost. I could explain the emergency checkout to Eleanor later. As I drove toward Northfield, the afternoon sun sinking lower in the sky, I rehearsed what I would do. Get in, pack quickly, get out before sunset. Simple. But as I turned onto Hill Road, I saw something that made my heart sink. A tree had fallen across the road about half a mile from the farmhouse driveway, completely blocking the way. My GPS indicated the only other approach would take an additional 45 minutes on back roads. By then, the sun would be down. I sat in my idling car staring at the fallen tree, a massive oak that must have come down very recently. Its leaves were still green, the exposed wood pale and fresh. This was no coincidence. Someone or something didn't want me to leave. Checking my watch, 5:42 p.m., with sunset coming around 7:15, I weighed my options. I could try the alternate route, but if there were other obstacles, I might end up stranded on some back road after dark. Or I could abandon my luggage and essentials at the farmhouse and find a hotel in Burlington, returning in daylight tomorrow. Or I could go back and spend one more night following the rules. Reason told me to turn around immediately, but a surge of irritation overrode my fear. I was being manipulated, and I didn't like it. If Eleanor was behind this, some elaborate scheme to scare guests for her amusement, I wanted answers. I turned around and drove to downtown Northfield, where I found a small coffee shop with Wi-Fi. I ordered an Americano and used the connection to search for alternate accommodations and research more about the area. The browser history on my phone still had the forum thread about Northfield's name change. I scrolled down, finding a comment I'd missed earlier from someone claiming to be a local historian. The Abenaki called the area Asquahigan, meaning doorway or crossing place. They considered it taboo to stay after dark in the valley north of what's now the town center. Colonial records from the 1760s mention settlers' children reporting thin friends who appeared in the woods and invited them to play games after sunset. 3 children disappeared in 1771 after reportedly following these friends into the forest. The settlement was temporarily abandoned until 1781. Another commenter had replied, "My grandmother told me the thin ones can't enter a home unless invited, but they're clever about getting invitations. They mimic family members, children in distress, travelers needing shelter. Once invited, they can return freely unless proper precautions are taken." I felt a chill despite the coffee shop's warmth. This matched too closely with my experiences: the knocking, the child's voice, the rules against responding. A text message notification broke my concentration. "Remember Rule 1, be inside before sunset. Eleanor." I texted back immediately. "There's a tree blocking the road. I think I'm going to stay in Burlington tonight." 3 dots appeared, then, "Dangerous. Roads not safe after dark. Return to the farm immediately. Follow all rules tonight. I'll explain everything tomorrow in person." "Why should I trust you?" I typed, my frustration mounting. The reply was immediate. "Because I'm the only thing keeping them from getting in. Look at the date. Tonight is dangerous." I checked the date, June 21st. The summer solstice, the longest day of the year. I wasn't superstitious, but something about that felt significant. Another text from Eleanor. "If you won't come back, at least stay where there are people and lights. Don't drive rural roads after dark tonight." The urgency in her messages seemed genuine. I felt torn between skepticism and a growing conviction that something truly abnormal was happening. My phone battery was at 22%, not enough to research further or navigate unfamiliar back roads in the dark if something went wrong. Against my better judgment, I decided to return to the farmhouse. At least there I knew the rules. Before leaving the coffee shop, I stopped the barista, a young woman with dyed blue hair and multiple earrings. "Excuse me, do you know anything about the old legends in this area? Something about thin people." She stopped wiping the counter and gave me a searching look. "You're staying at the Prescott farm, aren't you?" "How did you?" "Small town." She cut me off. "Plus, you've got that look. The only outsiders who ask about the thin ones are staying up that way." She leaned closer. "My advice? Don't drive around after dark tonight. It's the solstice." "What happens on the solstice?" She glanced toward the door as if worried someone might overhear. "The barrier gets thin, thinner than usual." She paused. "Look, I don't know if any of it's true, but my mom always kept iron nails above all the doors and windows on solstice nights. Said they couldn't cross iron." I thanked her and left, making a quick stop at the hardware store 2 doors down. If folklore was to be believed, a few dollars worth of iron nails might be valuable insurance. As I drove back toward the farmhouse, I noticed how rapidly the light was fading. The GPS indicated sunset in 29 minutes. Turning onto the gravel driveway, I noticed something odd. The fallen tree was gone. The road was completely clear, as if nothing had blocked it earlier. Rather than being relieved, I felt a cold weight in my stomach. I was being herded, manipulated into returning. The farmhouse stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, looking innocent enough in the fading daylight. I parked and hurried inside, locking the door behind me. Rule 1. Accomplished. There were fresh trails of dirt on the kitchen floor, more than I'd seen before. They led from the back door toward the basement door, which stood slightly ajar despite the chair I'd wedged under the handle. Following Rule 7, I grabbed the broom and swept up the dirt, disposing of it in the toilet as instructed. I went through the house systematically, checking each room. More dirt by the windows in the living room. A child-sized handprint on the bathroom mirror. Dirt on my pillow, arranged in a crude stick figure drawing. Something wanted me to know it had been here, that it had access. After cleaning everything, I checked all the locks again and made sure every curtain was securely closed. I took the iron nails from the hardware store and placed them above each door and window, using the handle of a butter knife to hammer them in since I couldn't find any tools. The sun dipped below the horizon. Another night had begun. I tried to stay calm, turning on the TV and keeping one light on in the living room per Rule 5. I sent one more text to Eleanor. Back at the house, following rules, many dirt trails inside. What are they? No reply came. My phone battery was down to 15%, so I plugged it into the only charger I had, in the bedroom. I'd check it later. As darkness deepened outside, I felt the familiar tension building. Would there be knocking again tonight? Would the lights flicker, sending me to that basement with its strange symbols? The answer came at 8:47 p.m. 3 distinct knocks on the front door, harder than before. Then silence. I kept my eyes on the TV, trying to ignore it, but the knocking resumed, more insistent this time. Then a voice called out, not a child's this time, but a woman's, familiar. Mark? It's Eleanor. Please let me in. I need to explain everything. I froze. It sounded exactly like Eleanor's voice from our phone conversation. Could it really be her? Mark, please. It's not safe out here. They're coming. I need to get inside. Rule 4 echoed in my mind. Do not respond, no matter who or what you think it is. But what if it really was Eleanor? I can see your car, Mark. I know you're in there. Please, they're in the trees. They're watching me. Her voice sounded desperate, frightened. I found myself moving toward the door before catching myself. I forced my feet to stay planted, remembering Sheila's words. The thin people. They're clever about getting invitations. Mark! Eleanor's voice rose in panic. They're here! Please, open the door! What followed was a sound I'll never forget. A scream that started human, but twisted into something else. Something that raised the hair on my arms and sent a primal jolt of fear through my body. It wasn't a sound any human throat could make. Then silence again. I stood in the center of the living room, shaking, waiting for more tricks, more voices, but none came. Instead, the lights flickered, once, twice, then plunged into darkness. Rule 6, the basement. I fumbled for my phone to use as a flashlight, but remembered it was charging in the bedroom. Moving carefully through the dark house, I made it to the bedroom and unplugged my phone, turning on its flashlight. The 11% battery. It would have to do. The basement door was completely open now, though I was certain I'd closed it. Pointing my phone's light down the stairs, I began my descent, dread building with each step. The basement looked the same as before, dirt floor, stone walls, old furniture. But the strange symbols etched into the earth seemed more distinct, as if they'd been recently refreshed. The protective circle was still intact. I made my way to the chair in the center and sat down, keeping my feet carefully within the bounds of the symbols. The light on my phone flickered, and I reduced the brightness to conserve battery. That's when I noticed the old trunk in the corner, previously hidden behind some boxes. It seemed to have been recently moved, the dust on the floor disturbed around it. Curiosity overrode caution. I approached the trunk, still careful not to disturb any of the symbols on the floor, and examined it. The lock was broken, hanging loosely from its hasp. Taking a deep breath, I lifted the lid. Inside were stacks of papers, old letter-bound journals, and what appeared to be hand-drawn maps. I took out the journal on top and opened it to find neat handwriting, dated 1947. August 15th. Purchased the old Cromwell farm today despite the warnings. The property was a bargain considering the acreage. Local superstitions don't concern me, though Margaret at the bank seemed genuinely worried when she processed the loan. Mentions something about rules that must be followed. Nonsense, of course, but the soil is rich and the location ideal. August 21st, first night in the new house. Sarah thought she heard knocking at the kitchen door around midnight, but when I checked, no one was there. Probably just the house settling or wildlife in the yard. August 23rd, more knocking last night at all hours. Sarah is frightened. Found strange tracks in the garden this morning, too narrow for deer but too large for any local wildlife I know of. Called the game warden, who suggested raccoons or opossums but didn't sound convinced. I flipped forward several pages. September 3rd, they took James. God help us, they took our boy. He answered the knocking, thinking it was the Miller child from down the road. Sarah found the door open this morning, and a trail of dirt leading to the forest. Sheriff organized a search party, but I know they won't find him. The dirt isn't normal soil. It shimmers in certain light, moves on its own if you watch long enough. September 4th, James returned today. Walked out of the forest at dawn, but it's not him. It looks like him, speaks with his voice, but Sarah and I both know it's not our son. Its movements are wrong. It watches us when it thinks we're not looking. I've locked it in the cellar. It keeps asking to be let out, using James's voice, calling for its mother. Sarah can't bear it. September 5th, made contact with old Mrs. Whitcomb, whose family has been in Northfield since the beginning. She recognized our situation immediately. Says what we're dealing with are the hollow ones, or thin people. Entities that exist in the space between worlds. The barrier is weakest on this property. They want to come through, to take our places in this world. But they need invitation and a host. She gave me the rules for survival and helped me place the symbols of protection in the cellar. The thing that isn't James screamed when we drew the circle, tried to break free of its restraints. Mrs. Whitcomb says we can't destroy it, but we can send it back. The ritual will require sacrifice. My phone battery dropped to 7%, the light dimming further. I hurriedly flipped to the final entry. September 10th, it is done. The ritual worked, though the cost was high. Sarah will never forgive me. The thing that wasn't James is gone, but the hollow ones remain beyond the boundaries, watching, waiting for another invitation. I've written out the rules and will pass them to anyone who stays on this property. As long as the symbols in the cellar remain intact, as long as the rules are followed, we can keep them at bay. But they're patient. They've been waiting since before the settlers arrived, and they'll keep waiting. Mrs. Whitcomb warns that the barrier grows thinnest at the solstices. Special precautions must be taken then. I've written these in the second journal for my descendants. My phone died just as I finished reading, plunging the basement into complete darkness. Heart racing, I tried to remember where the stairs were. That's when I heard it, a soft rustling sound coming from the far corner of the basement. Something was moving in the dark, something that hadn't been there before. And then the knocking began again, not from upstairs, but from beneath the dirt floor. The knocking from beneath the dirt floor paralyzed me. Tap, tap, tap. Then silence. Tap, Tap. Tap. It moved, tracing a path around the perimeter of the protective circle etched into the ground. I remained absolutely still, afraid that any movement might give away my exact position. My dead phone meant I had no light, no way to see what might be emerging from the earth. The darkness was absolute, the kind that makes you question whether your eyes are open or closed. The knocking stopped directly in front of where I stood. Then came a new sound, soil shifting, crumbling, as if something was pushing up from below. I bolted, scrambling in what I hoped was the direction of the stairs. My foot caught on something. A box, a tool I couldn't tell, and I stumbled, hands outstretched, desperate for any guidance in the blackness. My palm slapped against what felt like the rough stone of the basement wall, and I used it to orient myself, sliding along until I found the wooden railing of the staircase. I took the steps 2 at a time, my feet slipping on the old wood. Behind me, I heard more soil shifting, followed by something that sounded horribly like a long, rattling inhale, as if something long deprived of air was finally breathing. At the top of the stairs, I slammed the basement door shut. With no chair or other furniture nearby to barricade it, I pressed my back against the door, feeling it shudder as something struck the other side. The impact came again, harder this time. The door bucked against my weight. Whatever was down there, it was strong and becoming more insistent. I needed light, needed to see what I was dealing with. Keeping my back pressed firmly against the basement door, I fumbled along the kitchen counter with one hand, searching for anything I could use. My fingers closed around what felt like a box of matches next to the gas stove. I struck one, the sudden flare momentarily blinding me. In that instant, the pounding on the door ceased. The match illuminated only a small circle around me. The kitchen counter, a portion of the refrigerator, the edge of the sink. Beyond that, darkness. The match burned down, singeing my fingers, and I dropped it, quickly lighting another. I needed a more substantial light source. Holding the match carefully, I opened drawers until I found a candle in the third one of those emergency tapers meant for power outages. I lit it, the flame steadier and brighter than the match. Rule 5 echoed in my mind. Keep one light on in any room you occupy, but never more than one. As if responding to my memory of the rule, something pounded on the basement door again, making me jump and nearly drop the candle. I needed to move, to find a more defensible position. Candle held high, I made my way to the living room. The knocking followed me, transferring from the basement door to the walls themselves, as if whatever was making the sound was tracking my movement through the house. In the living room, I placed the candle on the coffee table, carefully observing Rule 5. The flickering light cast shifting shadows that played tricks on my eyes, making the corners of the room seem to move. The knocking circled the room, first one wall, then another, then what sounded like the ceiling above me. It was as if the house itself was being tested, each surface tapped and evaluated for weakness. I checked my watch. 11:42 p.m. Hours before dawn. I couldn't maintain this standoff all night. Then it happened. A new sound joined the knocking, the distinct sound of dirt hitting the floor. I raised the candle and saw it. Soil sifting down from the ceiling, forming a small pile on the hardwood. As I watched, the pile grew, more dirt falling like a thin stream of sand from an unseen crack above. Rule 7. If you find dirt on the floor that wasn't there before, sweep it up immediately and flush it down the toilet. I needed to follow the rule, but the broom was in the kitchen, and I didn't want to leave the candle unattended. If I took it with me, whatever room I left would be in darkness, a violation of Rule 5. The dirt continued to fall, the pile now the size of a dinner plate. I had no choice. I grabbed the candle and ran to the kitchen, found the broom and dustpan, then rushed back to the living room. The dirt pile had doubled in size in those few seconds, and now there was something else. Finger-like impressions appearing in the soil, as if an invisible hand was writing in it. I swept it up quickly, trying not to look at the strange markings, and hurried to the bathroom. Dumping the dirt into the toilet, I flushed and watched it swirl away, feeling a momentary relief. That relief evaporated when I returned to the living room. The dirt was back, an even larger pile now, and the impressions in it were clearer. Not random patterns, but deliberate symbols, similar to those I'd seen etched in the basement floor. The knocking had stopped, replaced by a heavy silence, but felt more threatening than the noise. I swept up the new dirt and flushed it again, then returned to find yet another pile forming, dirt now streaming steadily from a widening crack in the ceiling. This was a losing battle. Each time I removed the dirt, more appeared, faster than before. The room was becoming colder too, a damp chill that hadn't been present earlier settling into the air. On my fourth trip to flush away dirt, I heard a new sound from the living room, a soft squelching noise, like mud being compressed underfoot. I froze in the bathroom doorway, candle held high. In the center of the living room, the dirt was forming a mound that rose as I watched, shaping itself into something approximately 3 feet tall. It wasn't just dirt anymore. It glistened with moisture, more like clay, taking on a vaguely humanoid shape. The figure had no distinct features, just depressions where eyes might be and a horizontal slash suggesting a mouth. As I stared, paralyzed by shock and fear, that slash widened into a gaping hole, and a sound emerged. Not quite a voice, but a whispering rustle like dry leaves being crushed. "Mark," it seemed to say, drawing out the vowel. "Let us in properly, Mark." I backed away, bumping into the wall behind me. The candle's flame wavered, nearly going out. "We're already inside," the dirt figure continued, its not quite mouth moving unnaturally. "But we need an invitation to stay, to where, to be." "What are you?" I managed to ask, instantly regretting breaking Rule 4. I wasn't supposed to respond to anything, but this thing was already inside the house. The figure's head tilted at an impossible angle, nearly touching its shoulder. "We are the ones who were here first, before your kind, before any kind. We are the hollow ones, the thin people, the waiting ones." A fresh wave of soil cascaded from the ceiling, adding bulk to the figure, which was now growing taller, its form becoming more defined. Arms extended from its torso, too long and jointed in too many places. "Tonight, the walls between are thin," it continued. "Tonight, we can come through fully with the right invitation." "I'm not inviting you anywhere," I said, trying to sound firm despite my terror. "And I'm not breaking any more rules." The dirt figure moved toward me, leaving the sludgy trail on the floor. Its movement was wrong, smooth yet jerky, as if it was skipping frames of animation. "You've already broken Rule 4 by speaking to us," it said, and I could have sworn the slash of its mouth curved upward in a smile. "And Rule 5. I glanced around, confused, then realized with horror that when I'd brought the candle to the kitchen to get the broom, I'd left the living room in darkness. "Rules broken cannot be unbroken," the thing whispered, now just feet away from me. "And we have waited so long." Its arm extended further than any human limb could reach, elongating toward my face. I ducked and ran, making for the front door. Rules be damned. I wasn't staying in this house another minute. I fumbled with the locks, fingers slipping in my panic. Behind me, I heard the wet slither of the dirt figure moving across the floor. As the last lock turned and I pulled the door open, something cold and damp wrapped around my ankle. I kicked free and stumbled onto the porch, nearly falling down the steps. The night air hit me like a physical force, heavy, humid, and strangely viscous, as if the atmosphere itself had thickened. In the yard, illuminated only by the candle I still clutched, I saw them. Dozens of figures stood in a loose circle around the house. Tall, impossibly thin silhouettes darker than the night sky behind them. They were vaguely human-shaped but wrong in every proportion. Limbs too long, torsos too narrow, heads too small or too large. They stood completely still, all facing the house, facing me. I froze on the porch steps, caught between the dirt creature behind me and whatever these things were in front of me. Rule 2 echoed in my mind. Do not leave the house between sunset and sunrise for any reason. I broken that rule too. As if responding to my thought, the figures began to move, flowing toward the house with that same unsettling smoothness I'd seen in the dirt creature. They made no sound as they moved across the lawn. I had nowhere to go but back inside. I slammed the door shut, turning to face the dirt figure, which had now grown to human height and developed more defined features. A face that looked half-formed, like clay molded by an amateur sculptor. "You've broken 3 rules now," it said, the voice clearer. "That's enough. That's invitation enough." Something pounded on the front door behind me. Not the rhythmic knocking from before, but an insistent hammering. The windows rattled in their frames as impacts struck them simultaneously. The thin people outside were trying to get in, and from the increasing intensity of the assault, the house wouldn't keep them out for long. The dirt figure extended both arms toward me, its fingers elongating, reaching. I backed away until I hit the staircase leading to the second floor, Eleanor's private residence. I had nowhere else to go. Taking the stairs 2 at a time, I ascended to a landing and another door, locked. I pounded on it, shouting for Eleanor, but there was no response. Below, the front door crashed open. The thin people began to pour into the house, their movements fluid yet wrong, like time-lapse footage of insects. The dirt figure joined them, its body now more defined, more human-like, but still composed of that strange, glistening soil. I had one desperate option left. I raised my foot and kicked at the door to Eleanor's residence with all my strength. The old wood splintered around the lock, and the door swung inward. I stumbled into darkness, quickly raising my candle. The room revealed was not what I expected. Not a living space, but something that looked more like a workshop or study. Tables lined the walls, covered with books, jars filled with unidentifiable substances, and what appeared to be scientific equipment. In the center of the room stood a large wooden table, and on it lay what looked like a body covered in a white sheet. Behind me, the first of the thin people reached the top of the stairs. I slammed the broken door shut and dragged a heavy bookcase in front of it, knowing it wouldn't hold them for long. With nowhere left to run, I approached the table in the center of the room, drawn by a terrible curiosity. I lifted the edge of the sheet. Beneath it lay Eleanor, or what I assumed was Eleanor, though I'd never met her in person. She appeared to be sleeping, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths, but her skin had a strange, waxy quality, and her features seemed somehow blurred, as if I was viewing her through a foggy lens. Next to the table, a journal lay open. In handwriting identical to the notes I'd found in the basement, I read, June 21st, 2025. Summer solstice. The barrier will be at its thinnest. Must remain in stasis while the visitor occupies the house. If rules are followed, another year of containment is possible. If not... The entry ended there. The pounding on the door grew more insistent, the bookcase beginning to slide across the floor as something pushed against it. Eleanor? I said, gently shaking the woman on the table. "Eleanor, wake up. They're coming. They're inside the house." Her eyes snapped open, and I stumbled back in shock. They were completely black, without iris or pupil, like two holes opening onto an infinite void. "You broke the rules," she said, her voice hollow yet resonant. "You let them in." The bookcase toppled over as the door burst open behind me. Eleanor rose from the table with unnatural fluidity, as if gravity affected her differently. Her black eyes remained fixed on me as the door behind us splintered further, thin arms with too many joints reaching through the widening gaps. "You shouldn't be up here," she said, her voice carrying that same hollow quality. "No one should be up here on the solstice night." "What are you?" I asked, backing away until I hit one of the tables lined with equipment. Glass vials rattled precariously. "I am Eleanor Prescott," she replied, "at least what's left of her, what she became to contain them." The doorframe cracked further, the thin people pushing through. Their forms were clearer now in the candlelight, emaciated, elongated bodies with skin like weathered parchment stretched over impossible angles. They had no features I could discern, just smooth expanses where faces should be, yet somehow I could feel them watching, sensing, hungering. "They're coming in," I said urgently. "We have to get out of here." Eleanor shook her head. "They've always been here. This land sits on a finning point between our world and theirs. My family has maintained the barrier for generations." She gestured to the journals on the nearby desk. "The Prescotts weren't the first to own this land, but we're the first to understand what it requires." "And what's that?" I asked, eyeing the advancing thin people. They moved with a strange hesitancy now, as if Eleanor's presence gave them pause. "Balance, rules, sacrifice." She moved to a cabinet and removed what looked like an antique iron box. "Every solstice, the barrier thins almost to nothing. We need an anchor on both sides to maintain separation." "I don't understand." "I exist in both places simultaneously," she interrupted, opening the box to reveal what looked like soil. The same strange, slightly shimmering dirt I've been sweeping up. Part of me here, part of me there. It's the only way to maintain the boundary when it grows this weak. She looked up at me, those black eyes reflecting the candlelight oddly. "But you broke the rules. You spoke to them. You left the house after dark. You've disrupted the balance." The dirt creature that had formed in the living room squeezed through the doorway, its body distorting to fit through the narrow opening. It had changed, its features more defined now, almost human except for the strange texture of its skin and the too wide mouth. With horror, I realized it was forming a face that looked like mine. "What do they want?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "To wear us," Eleanor said simply. "To be us. They've been trying for centuries. They have form in their world but lack substance in ours. They need vessels, human bodies, to exist here fully." The thin people and the dirt creature had stopped advancing, forming a semicircle around us. They swayed slightly, as if moved by a breeze I couldn't feel. "The rules," I said, understanding dawning. "They're not just superstition. They're a containment protocol." Eleanor nodded. "Rule 1 keeps you inside when the barrier is weakest. Rule 2 prevents direct contact. Rule 3 stops you from seeing them. Visual contact weakens your resistance. Rule 4 prevents verbal interaction, which they can use to influence you. Rule 5 maintains light, which they cannot tolerate well in their partial state. Rule 6 sends you to the protected basement when the power, which disrupts their ability to manifest, is threatened. And Rule 7, the dirt. I finished. It's them, isn't it? Some physical manifestation that crosses over. Yes, Every particle is a potential anchor for them to hold onto in our reality. Flushing it sends it to running water, which disperses their energy. As if in response to our discussion, the dirt creature took a step forward, its mouth opening wider than any human mouth could. "We've waited so long," it said in that rustling voice. "We've watched your kind spread across the land, building your structures, digging into the earth, thinning the walls between worlds without even knowing." "You can't have him," Eleanor said firmly. "He's under the protection of the Prescott Covenant." "The covenant is broken," the thing replied. "3 rules violated. The old agreement says that's invitation enough." Eleanor's expression remained impassive, but I sensed concern in the slight tensing of her shoulders. "The agreement is with me, not him. He's an innocent, unaware of the consequences. Yet he stands here, in the forbidden space, on the solstice night." The dirt creature gestured with one malformed hand. "The visitor becomes the vessel. That is the law since the first settlement." "What are they talking about?" I asked Eleanor, trying to keep my voice steady. "What law? What vessel?" She turned those black eyes to me, and for a moment, I thought I glimpsed regret in their endless depths. "The Prescott family made a pact over a century ago. We maintain the boundary, keep them contained in exchange for accommodation." "What kind of accommodation?" "One visitor, every solstice, who might become a vessel if they break the rules." She looked away. "We never force it. We give clear instructions. Most follow them perfectly and leave unharmed, never knowing how close they came." The cold realization washed over me. "You've been feeding them, setting up guests in this house, knowing what might happen." "Containing them," she corrected. "The alternative is far worse. Without the pact, without the rules, they would spread beyond this property, beyond Northfield. They've been trying to cross fully for centuries." The dirt creature took another step forward. "Time grows short. The night wanes. We must have what was promised." I looked frantically around the room for any escape, any weapon. There must be something we can do, some way to reinforce the barrier. Eleanor was quiet for a moment, then said, "There is one way. A reset. A new anchor." She opened a drawer and removed a small knife with an ornate handle. "My great-grandfather discovered it when his son was taken. The barrier can be strengthened with a willing sacrifice." "Sacrifice?" I repeated, eyeing the knife with growing alarm. "Not death," she clarified. "Something between life and non-life. Suspension. Like I was on that table. Someone must serve as the anchor, existing partially in both worlds, holding the barrier in place." The thin people began to move again, sensing something shifting in the balance of power. The dirt creature's features, my features, twisted in what might have been anger. "No," it hissed. "The old ways are clear. The visitor broke the rules. The visitor is ours." Eleanor stepped between me and the creatures. "I am the Prescott guardian. I can amend the pact." She turned to me, her expression solemn. "But it must be willing. You must choose." "Choose what exactly?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand the terrible options before me. "Become like me, an anchor, suspended between worlds, maintaining the barrier. Or," she glanced at the creatures, "or become like them, a hollow vessel for something else to wear." The magnitude of the choice hit me like a physical blow. "How long?" I managed. "How long would I be suspended?" "Until the next solstice. Then I can take your place again, and you would be free to leave. 1 year. A year of my life, gone. But the alternative was unthinkable." "What do I need to do?" I asked. The dirt creature lunged forward, but instead of attacking, it fell to its knees, its form beginning to crumble. "No!" it shrieked, the sound like sand being rubbed between stones. "He is ours!" Eleanor ignored it, moving swiftly to one of the tables where she mixed something in a small ceramic bowl, some of the shimmering dirt with a liquid from one of the vials. "Drink this," she said, holding out the bowl. "Then lie on the table. I'll complete the ritual. You'll sleep until the winter solstice. When you wake, you can leave and never return." The thin people were pressing closer, their movements more frantic now. The dirt creature was fully disintegrating, its features melting back into formless soil. "The pact cannot be altered," one of the thin people said, its voice like wind through dead leaves. "The visitor is marked. We have tasted him already." Eleanor gave it a cold stare. "The pact gives me authority as guardian to choose the anchor. He has chosen to serve. The law is satisfied." I took the bowl with trembling hands. The mixture inside was dark and grainy, with that same earthy smell I'd noticed throughout the house. "What happens if I don't drink it?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Then I cannot protect you," Eleanor said simply. "The barrier will continue to weaken. By dawn, they will have enough presence in our world to take you, to hollow you out, and wear your form. You would exist as consciousness trapped in a body you no longer control, watching as something else lives your life." Behind her, the thin people were becoming more substantial, their forms more defined in the candlelight. I could now see suggestions of features on their smooth faces, depressions where eyes should be, lines indicating mouths. I raised the bowl to my lips, the bitter mineral taste flooding my mouth. It burned going down, leaving a strange numbness in its wake. "Quickly," Eleanor urged, guiding me to the table. "Lie down. The transition has begun." As I lay on the cool wooden surface, I felt a peculiar sensation spreading through my limbs. A heaviness, as if gravity was increasing exponentially, pulling me down not just into the table but through it, into some space beyond. Eleanor began to chant, in a language I didn't recognize, her black eyes fixed on a point above my head. The thin people retreated to the corners of the room, their movements now sluggish, constrained. My vision began to blur, the edges of the room growing dark. I felt myself sinking deeper into whatever space was opening beneath me. The last thing I saw before consciousness fled was Eleanor standing over me, one hand placed on my forehead, the other holding the knife against her palm. A thin line of blood welled up where the blade touched her skin. "One anchor freely given," she said, the words seeming to echo from very far away. "One barrier restored." Then darkness took me completely, and I fell through the world into somewhere else. Ryan from the Providence office was the one who found my car. He'd been concerned when I didn't show up for the final day of meetings or respond to any calls or texts. The local police traced my cell phone to the Prescott farmhouse, where they found my luggage, laptop, and other belongings, but no sign of me. The official story, according to the newspaper clipping Margaret Whitcomb keeps in a folder at the Historical Society, is that I likely went hiking in the nearby state forest and got lost. Extensive searches found nothing. Eventually, I was declared a missing person, another strange disappearance in Northfield's long history. I know all this because part of me can still perceive the world, vaguely, distantly, like watching through layers of gauze. Most of my consciousness exists somewhere else, in a gray place where time moves differently and strange. Thin shapes move at the edges of my perception. But there's enough of me left in the farmhouse to know what's happening, to feel the passage of seasons, to understand that I'm not fully gone. Sometimes when the barrier shifts slightly, I can see Eleanor moving through the house. She looks different now, more solid, more human, her eyes normal again. She speaks to me occasionally, though I don't think she knows I can hear her. "Just a few more months," she said yesterday, pausing at the top of the basement stairs. "The winter solstice comes, and you'll be free." I want to believe her. Need to believe her. The Prescott farm has had no Airbnb guests since my disappearance. Eleanor closed that part of her business, though locals say she still maintains the property meticulously. On nights when the moon is full or storms roll through, people driving past report seeing lights in all the windows and a figure standing on the porch, watching the tree line. My family hasn't given up searching. My sister visits Northfield every few weeks, putting up fresh flyers with my picture, interviewing locals, hiking the forest trails with volunteers. She stayed at every hotel and B&B in the area, but never at the Prescott farm. Eleanor always tells her the property isn't accepting guests. The police have questioned Eleanor multiple times, but they found nothing suspicious. My car was parked normally in the driveway. My belongings were undisturbed. The last entry in my laptop's search history was about Northfield's history and local legends. No one knows about the basement with its protective symbols, or the room upstairs where I lie in suspended animation, existing in two worlds at once. No one knows about the thin people who gather at the edge of the property on moonless nights, their elongated forms swaying like trees in a windless air, watching, waiting for the barrier to thin again. Sometimes, when the connection between worlds fluctuates, I can feel them reaching for me, trying to pull me fully into their gray realm. But the anchor holds. The sacrifice keeps the balance. I count the days now, as best I can in my fragmented state of awareness. The winter solstice approaches. December 21st. The day Eleanor promised I would be released, free to return to my life with a year-long gap I could never truly explain. Will she honor that promise? Or will I become like the Cromwell boy from the journal? Another hollow vessel, another part of Northfield's dark history. Every night, the thin ones gather and watch the farmhouse. Every night they test the rules, seeking weaknesses, invitations, ways to cross over. And every night I wait, suspended between worlds, holding the barrier closed with my divided existence. Remember the rules, if you ever find yourself in Northfield. Some boundaries should never be crossed. Some doors should never be opened. Some knocks should never be answered.